Hi everyone, my name is Roland and I am the team lead at Muwado, Africa's storytelling platform. So if you haven't heard of Muwado, we are an online platform, muwado.com, muwado.com. And we are a community of about 2,000 plus African storytellers that are just enjoying each other's stories and connecting through, our experiences and our shared relatable stories. So Muwado is also very big on trying to monetize these stories so that the creatives who are telling these stories can make a living, make some income of the story. So that's a very big component of our agenda and our mission. So to further this, we organized the Art of Commercial Storytelling webinars to help the members on our platform, first of all, get a refresher on the basics of storytelling, be it fiction or non-fiction, or even audio storytelling, but also to just introduce them and take them on a deeper dive on digital storytelling, which is what we practice because we're based online. But lastly, we also wanted to just shine a light on the commercial aspect of storytelling for those who are serious and who want to make some income of this talent that they've been given. So that's the purpose of these webinars, and we look forward to seeing you in as many of them as we can. And at this juncture, I'll pass on to the facilitator to begin. Thank you.
My name is Kagayi Ngobi. I am a storyteller, basically. But beyond that, beyond just being a storyteller, I am a poet, a publisher, a performer, and a poetry coach. And storytelling is the way I make my living. Yeah. All right. So yes, for today's session, we are supposed to be talking about plot, pacing, and structure in storytelling. Building a coherent and engaging plot, the traditional and modern narrative structures, to include the 3-act nonlinear and fragmented storytelling, the experimenting with structure, flashbacks, multiple timelines, and parallel narratives. Yeah, that is based on the notes that I was sent. But I have to say it forthright that I am not a huge believer in structure, in designated structure. But like they say, before I'm a huge believer in breaking the rules. But before you can break the rules, you need to know what rules you're breaking. I also so much believe in that. And so for our participants, I have a different approach to how I would like us to engage, in this particular, call it interaction. Yeah. I would like to hear from you what you think about plot. How, from your experience, what are the best ways of building plot and pacing and structure in your own storytelling? I'm much more curious for us to share from our experiences on how we get to do this. Yeah. And hopefully through that, we shall be able to learn from each other. I learn from you, but then you also learn from me. Thank you, if you don't mind. So I wonder, would anyone be willing to share what they think, how they think the best way, at least from their experience, how plotting and pacing and structure are important and how they do it in their own creative writing. Thank you.
I think I'll go first, while other people think.
Thank you, Roland.
Personally,
yes.
I don't think about it as much as maybe I should. I don't know who makes these rules, but I don't think about it as much. I think I may be subscribing to the same school of thought as you. So typically when I am doing a story, wherever the idea comes from, then it just becomes a journey of expansion in the process of writing. So it's not like I have gone around and print and made like a blueprint of how the story will flow, and then it's going to start from here, and then it'll have this inflection point. It normally happens organically. The idea comes and then it grows, and then you kind of think, how do I want to bring out this angle better? And then you brainstorm for a minute. So it's a very hands-on process, I would say, on my side, in terms of plot and structure. Never really for a plant. And then the rest of the magic happens in editing.
Oh yes, yes, yes. I think it's something that I was also going to talk about. That I prepared to talk about is editing. The great stories in the editing, but in all these things that you're talking about, with the structures, I guess the question that we need to also be looking at is, okay, what is plot, and what is pacing, and what is structure, and as the creator of the story, how do you determine that these are the series of events I'm going to put together, and this is the kind of rhythmic pace that I'm going to have to give the story, and that this is the best structure that I want to put out there. For me, I don't know if all our participants are familiar with borders, the Ugandan, mode of transportation of a motorcycle, transportation that's very popular throughout the country. I think some of the best storytellers that I have encountered are the border men, actually. And that is if you take keen interest in what they're telling you, despite the wind blowing over your ears. They normally have a way they start off telling their story. It normally begins with a lesson that they learned, and then they give you a background, and then they give you the context of the story that they're introducing, and then they tell you how it affected them. And by the time the journey is coming to an end, they're also coming to a conclusion. It's almost as if they time that if this trip is going to take 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you a story that's going to fit in 20 minutes. And it is something that for me, every time I think about, creating a story, that eventually, of course, I want the readers to find gripping, or the listeners to find captivating. I always think about these border men and the stories that they normally tell, how they begin, and how they choose how they select the pointers in the stories to highlight, and how they conclude it. And so I think a master storyteller is someone who, even before you get to decide, this is the kind of story that I'm going to tell, you sort of already know your mood board. Yeah. So, first and foremost, the story you're going to tell. I think the worst storytellers are those ones who begin telling a story when they don't know how it's going to end. I would rather that as a person, the story that you want to tell from beginning to end, even before you sit down to document it in whatever form that you're using, either on paper or on the screen. The story from beginning to end. The facts very well. You have chosen the highlighting events. The turning points in the story. How it is going to progress. Then, as I sit down to compose the story, you seem to be telling the story from backwards, because you know exactly what you're going to tell, and what scene, what character, what event to introduce at a certain point, because you understand how important it is going to be in the near future, you see. And so I think for anyone who's going to be telling a story, if you're going to plot your story very well, I think for me, the most important thing would be you already knowing your story even before you write it. Perhaps you've even gone through it in memory over and over again. And then by the time you are sitting down to write it, you control the story, but not letting the story control you. Does anyone have to say anything about that?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I wanted to just maybe talk about those situations where you only have the idea, but you don't have a full story. And so you just decide to scribble down some points and see where the story leads you. You basically like you are the audience as well as the creator.
Yeah.
And so you just create the plot and see where it takes, and then maybe you come back to revise and see where the idea took you and maybe where you want it to go after you've already seen where at least the idea that you wanted to put across come out. How does that translate into plot and structuring?
Thank you. I guess especially in fiction, right? When you start out, first and foremost, I guess even in fiction, they keep telling us this, that there is no idea that is new under the sun. So for even every thought that you possess, every bulb moment, every eureka moment that you have, it's starting from somewhere. I too, I am familiar with such an instance. So there's a story that I wrote. It's now developed it's now a fully developed play, but it took me 3 years to write. And so the background of it is that there's a girl who was raped at Makerere University Business School. Well, the story goes that she went to visit a guy a bad day, and she went with drinks, and then she wakes up the next day and figures something went down that she did not consent to. So she does not exactly recollect what happened, but when she shares it with her friends decide to seek justice for her on social media, on Twitter, now X. And there's just this huge backlash that the social media fraternity just throws at her friends and at the victim. And while I was reading all through this, I felt sad. And I said to myself, as a creative writer, I need to create a story that sensitizes my society about victim blaming the victims of sexual violence. Yeah. And we need, as a society, we need to think critically about this matter. Now, all I had was an idea, and I held on to it for maybe 5 days, and I was like, I need to do something about this. I need to write something. And then, before I could start writing it, there's a poem that I read about 10 years ago, and it gave me a structure. It sort of had an idea of how I wanted to write this poem. I wanted to write it. The poem actually started as a poem, and then it grew into a play. And I was like, okay, how do I get to tell this story? And now this particular poem that I remembered was a voice of two people, a male and a female, and it was about the art of seduction, and I said, now this is exactly what I want to create. I want to create a scenario that most people would not identify as rape, but when you put it out there, people realize, oh, actually, this was rape, And so I started developing the idea slowly by slowly. And then I wrote the first sketch in like maybe 5 days. And then I also didn't like what it was. I was like, this is too obvious. I need to find a way of creating it further. And then, based on that idea that I had created, I started researching about sexual violence. I started researching about female rape. I read a lot about male rape, to the point that I started going to bars to talk to strangers I'll just, walk up to a stranger and I ask them, "Hi, my name is Peter Kagayi, and I'm a playwright, and I'm writing this story about rape." And I would ask them, what's the flimsiest excuse you've ever had a guy give justifying rape? And so many people would tell me whatever their ideas were, and I would take note of those lines and the conversations I had, and then I would go back and then I put them into the play. I'd put them into the play. Eventually it took me about 3 years of composing. And by the time we decided to start putting it into the public for people to view it, believe me, I knew I had created a masterpiece. And I'm saying it with all humility. I knew that people are going to watch something that was going to push them out of their comfort zones, that was going to get them to talk about, sexual violence, that was going to create a safe and brave space for victims of sexual violence to boldly speak up. But it's because I had given it enough time. So even when you have an idea, and it's just an idea, it's important that, before you get stuck in the idea and thinking, where can I take it in just your thought, do some research around it. There is this novel by Herman Hamill, it's called Herman Melville, Moby Dick. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of that novel. So the story goes, this guy was telling, who wanted to write a novel about, he had heard this story of a sailor who had been part of this ship, that had gone out there to do whale hunting, and that the people on that ship that it was a fascinating story, and he tried to write it. And yes, he had the structure of it, but he really didn't know. He didn't know how to, he really didn't know how to move forward with that particular idea. Then he started looking for that sailor. So he went and looked out for that sailor, and then he had the story. Then he had about how they survived on that ship, how they had to draw lots and have to even feed on each other because the ship went and disappeared for many years, and eventually was discovered, and this guy was the only survivor. And he managed to get that story and turn it into the novel, And there are so many other writers that you talk to whose ideas are sparked. Like the way you thought, it's just a spark of an idea, and they don't know where to take it. But the moment, I think for me, I believe, I think any good writer is a good researcher. You must be ready and willing to invest in time, to think about that particular idea that you want to develop. So if it is, say, Afrofuturism, Yuga-futurism, and you want to write about, like, I have a friend of mine called Dilman Dila. He likes creating these Uganda futuristic stories of people, traveling on brooms, and the way they fart is what is giving them energy to fly in the air and whatnot. And even when he creates these stories, you read them and you see he does a lot of research around, African witchcraft, and divination. And that is the sort of what he taps into to create these futuristic stories that he does. Yeah. And so rather than getting stuck, I would suggest that whatever idea that you've come up with, there is someone else who has already thought about it. So rather than getting stuck in understanding, how do I move forward, I would rather you say, who else has written about this? How have they written about this? What could be the new angle that I take? What could be the new way that I can express this particular story? And I assure you, the process will be slow, but it will be fun. It will be exciting. You'll be invigorated to carry your story forward, because you will know exactly how you're saying it in a way that no one else has said it. Yeah, I hope that helps. What does it say about non-planners? Yeah. I think I don't know. I think creative writing, storytelling and planning are like oil and water. So it's not like oil. They're like, yeah, like if you don't know how to, if you don't develop the culture of planning your story, it's going to be very difficult to tell a good story. You know, and even God, whom I believe in, because I'm a Christian, who created this world in 6 days, he also had a plan. You know, he started with forming lights out of darkness, and then he rested. You know, and then the next day he did something. The next day he did something. The next day he did something. And I mean, on day one, he was just. It is God who we believe is omnipotent, omnipresent, you know, omniscient. But even him, on one day, he was just making light, you know. So even as a writer, as you're planning, as you, when you come up with an idea, say I want to write a story about talking trees, yeah, and I don't know, these trees are going to revolt against people who are cutting them or something like that. You'll be surprised at how many other people have come up with that idea before, you know. And you're asking yourself a question now: how better can I tell this story? How different can I tell it? So it is in planning and researching that you can be a unique storyteller. Man, the day I realized that all my favorite writers and storytellers sometimes take even 8 years, you know, to craft a good story, is when I realized that writing is not just a stream of consciousness thing, you know. It's because building a story is like, or creating a story is like creating a build. It's like an architecture of thought, you know, an architecture of a narrative. And there is nothing that's going to fall on you and you think, okay, I'm going to be inspired and I'm going to write this good story. No. I have a friend who used to say, you know, writing is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And it took me quite a while to appreciate what that means. But yeah, there is a lot of effort that goes into planning how your story should come out well, you know. And that is the 99%. The 1% is the idea that you get, you know. The 99% is in how you express that idea on paper. And true to form, it really takes quite some deliberateness to be able to pull off a good story. Yes. And then how about comedians who freestyle or who rap? People, let me tell you something. Do not be fooled by people who freestyle and think that because you're seeing them stand on stage and do that thing, they don't rehearse. Or even comedians, don't think that the way they pull off their content is just off head. No. There is a lot of writing, there is a lot of memorization, there is a lot of editing and time that goes into these people creating these jokes. For example, if I'm to start with comedians, the format of making people, one of the hardest things to do in creative writing or even storytelling is getting people to laugh consistently. That is so hard. So for you might look at a person like Mariachi even, and you think that because he comes on stage and makes it look easy, that everything that he's composing is coming to him in that moment. No. There is a place where he goes down, he crafts his ideas. I attended a session where there was a comedian who was telling us how him and Uncle Mo have to meet and they brainstorm ideas, you know, and then they check, they try jokes out on each other before they get on stage. You see, they write and they have to, and then they have to come up with perfect intonations. You know, a good joke is about timing, and all these nuances that to us who are untrained might seem to be obvious. They are not. For the people that do freestyle, I can tell you this, they rehearse freestyle. They rehearse doing that, backstage. Like there is that famous metaphor that people use of an iceberg. Like the tip of the iceberg you see is the size of it. The size of the tip is not equated to the size underneath the water. Yeah. So when you see somebody doing that glorious work up there, you don't know how much effort and time they are putting into their work ethos, to make sure that everything around them becomes a metaphor. For example, I don't know. There was a time I read about how Eminem, the rapper Eminem, used to read the dictionary a lot, because for him, for you to be able to have that vocabulary in you, these words don't just come to you like from heaven, and you don't just wake up and then you dream them and then you wake up and you have them. No, the real work goes in improving on your grammar, enlarging your lexical, your lexical expressions, and it goes into always rehearsing and always writing and making sure that you stand up, that you are always ready. It's like a soldier who you see on the battlefield, shooting shots, shooting targets, and you're thinking these guys are doing it because it's a natural, but they have trained over years to be able to do that. There is no single storyteller I know, be it in what form, who just wakes up one day and says, me, I'm going to do this because I was born naturally with it. No, it's all hard work. It is all in planning. It is all in choosing, knowing your audience, knowing what you want to deliver. And that's how you do it. There is no shortcut to that. How different is the process for poetry? Honestly speaking, the only difference between all these genres is the expression of it, but the mindset is always the same. Because even a poem is, and this is what I keep telling my friends, even the people that we are seeking to publish, we keep telling them, look here, when you're going to create a poetry book, remember you're creating a storybook. The poems are also stories, and the reader should be given that experience of feeling like you're taking them on a journey of a narrative, and not just putting poems together that are incoherent. I always asked myself the question, why is it that a poet like Okot Pabitek can have one book, Song of Ochol and Song of Lawino, popular across generations, even beyond his lifetime? And some of us create poetry book, and Song of Lawino is a collection of 13 poems. And the rest of us have poetry collections that have over 50 poems, 100 poems, and people even struggle to remember one. Why is it that our poems are easily forgotten? And most people buy our books out of sympathy, out of pity, because they're saying, okay, he's my friend. Why is it that our narratives don't go beyond the page? And so I did a lot of reading around Okot Pabitek, and I realized that one of the things that guy cracked was that poetry is a form of storytelling. And if you want people to feel your poetry, it must take them on a journey, and of course it has to be relatable. So for me, just to answer the question, even if it's poetry, even if it's poetry, I would say it's the same process. Like I said, some of my favorite, okay, I haven't said, but some of my favorite poems are those poems that you read, and it's just a poem in 5 lines, but those 5 lines introduce you to a story that is going to stick with you, that you're going to relate to every time you find yourself in such a scenario, or there are poems that summarize an event that has been told in many books, but this poem is just of 7 lines. And you're thinking, wow, or if it's a love story and this poet is explaining to their part, to their lover why they love them so much and they love them that way. And you're going to read the poem, and the story of that poem sticks with you. So I believe that for me, when it comes to storytelling, all the genres cut across. The only difference would be that, now I'm writing a play. It has different rules of, of storytelling. Poetry, it has different, prose has different ways, journaling has different ways, animation has different ways. But the bottom line is that if you're going to be a storyteller, you have to be telling a story that sticks with people. And then I see some questions that are here in the chat. Let me try to respond to them. Are there any specific rules on how to pace a story? Definitely, yeah. There are specific rules. First and foremost, what is pacing? Pacing is the tempo upon which for me, I would call it the heartbeat of the heartbeat, the pace of the heartbeat of the story. That's how I would put it. So first and foremost is know what you want your reader or your audience to feel in that particular moment. Know how you want to make them feel. That will determine, for example, the descriptions that you're going to give to the mood. How are you going to describe the setting? How are you going to make the characters look? How are you going to make the characters appear in that particular moment? If, for example, let me use my example of the poem that I wrote, the one that I told you about. That's about rape. So, one of the things that we wanted to achieve with this particular story was, how do you tell a story of rape that most people do not recognize as rape? Yeah. And what I really wanted the people to feel was, for lack of a better word, I wanted them to feel horny. I wanted to increase their libido energy in the room, And so this is what we decided. I decided that I'm going to represent the rape that most people do not recognize as rape. So I'm going to create a sex scene where the yes and the no are confused, where the no sounds like a yes, and I'm going to put it in a scenario where the characters are familiar with each other. So it's going to be a relationship that is familiar, say boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. When most people think about rape, they think about the robbers, the rebels, the people who waylay other women on the streets, etc. So I wanted to put it in a very comfortable spot. So, and then we also made it the first part of the poem, So these characters are actually we create characters who are having sex. Actually, one character is raping the other, but it's a scenario that most people would define as consensual sex, but the character keeps saying no. The only difference is that the perpetrator mistakes the no to be a yes, because the no is not a strong no. It's a silent no. So in all the other parts, when the victim keeps telling the perpetrator, but I said no, the perpetrator keeps saying, but that no was a yes. See, so when we were pacing it, we wanted to take the audience off guard, So we wanted to give them a scenario at the beginning of the play where they would think, okay, maybe that's not rape, But as the play progresses, the audience is forced to choose sides. So you find that, by the end of the play, when we're having the conversation, there are these characters who are putting up their hands and they're saying, no, but that was not rape, And then there are those ones who are saying, but that was rape. And then the sensitization begins. So I think the pacing, like I said, it will depend on the kind of story you want to tell, how you want the audience to feel about that particular moment, and then what you want to achieve with the end of the story. See, say if if you're talking about, say, a robbery, that's going to, if you're going to write about, say, for example, a robbery, how do you begin that story? And you tell it, and then say you're going to tell it as, let me say, as an omniscient narrator. The person who has to prepare the robbers, and walk them towards the scene, and the same person who is supposed to describe the victim of the robbery who is at home. How do you also, take them to that scene? How do you make these characters meet? What time of the day is it? And is the robbery the end, or the escape of the robbery the end, or the consequences of the robbery the end? So knowing exactly how you want your story to move, for me, would be the first way to know how to, to structure, to pace, to pace your story. One of my favorite novels is a novel by a guy called Fyodor Dostoevsky, and it's called Crime and Punishment. And it's a story of a young lawyer called Raskolnikov who is running broke, and he rationalizes, and he no longer has money to pay his rent. And so he rationalizes that his old landlady is useless to the state. And so he decides to kill her, And one of the most, for me, one of the most tense pieces of literature I have read is how Dostoevsky describes Raskolnikov's movement from his apartment to go to his landlady and kill her. But this is happening like in the first third of the book, and the rest of the book is a psychological thriller where he has to deal with the investigations around his involvement. The other, and for me, I really liked that. I really liked how the writer positioned, the events. The other book that I can think about is say God's Bits of Wood. Now, God's Bits of Wood is an African novel by one of, I think the guy is called the father of Afro cinema, the Senegalese author Sembene Osman. And in that story, in that novel, there is a character called Bakayoko. Bakayoko is the protagonist, but I assure you, in the first half of the book, you don't meet the character Bakayoko in flesh, if I can say, you don't meet his character. He is introduced as a character that everyone else is talking about. From the first half of the novel, you're reading it and you're thinking, who is Bakayoko? But everyone is talking about Bakayoko. If Bakayoko was here, it would have been like this. I saw Bakayoko here. And it is only in the second half of the novel that now they introduce this Bakayoko that everyone is talking about, you see. And so positioning is very important, For me, the other rule that I can think about is in language. The language that you're going to use to define movement. So, again, are you creating a thrill? Do you want the reader to have a thrill? Do you want the reader to be nostalgic? Do you want to make the reader empathize with the character? That will also go into the kind of language that you use to define how the story is moving forward. Because language is different. If, like I said, if it's a robbery story or it's a murder story, and someone is moving towards that particular place where this story is supposed to be taking place, the way you describe how they're going to, the pace at which these characters are moving would be different from, the story where you're describing a character who is going to woo a girl or vice versa, So also understanding what your characters are trying to achieve is, and the language that is supposed to best explain what they are going through is very important. I think the other thing about pacing is setting. Where is the story? Where are you setting your story? And what kind of place is it? What kind of time is it? And thinking of time, it's not just what time of the day, but what is the zeitgeist, if I might use that word, like what is the general time, what in the context of the time that if you're writing a story that's taking place in 2024 or say 2025, and it's a love story and it's happening in urban Kampala, what other scenarios, what other situations are you placing it in, to make sure that the reader can empathize more with the story that is taking place. So I believe that even before you, I think it's important for you to understand what kind of story, you want to guide you on, to be able to tell your story. Yeah. And then, yes, and then Unity has a question. As for one person, a book or story idea can come up immediately, and for someone, can it take 5 to 10 years? Oh, yes. The ideas come to us in different forms. Yes, the ideas come to us in different forms, and they have different gestation periods. Kakwenza, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Ugandan novelist called Kakwenza Ruchirabashija, who currently lives in exile. So he wrote a novel called The Greedy Barbarian, which, if you haven't read, is an amazing story. But to be honest, it's a story. It's a script that he wrote in 3 days. Yeah. And then the editing took about 1, and it was self-editing. It is, for lack of a better phrase, it is poorly told. Yeah. It is rushed, especially the first edition. It was not well edited, but for some reason, this novel has become probably the novel that's going to define our generation. and for some reason, it had a stickiness factor. I think it's the best. I can assure you this. Kakwenza Rukirabashija is more relevant and more ardent. His works are more ardent than Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi's On the Ground in Uganda. I can say that again. And one of the things that Kakwenza got right, in my opinion, is that he told a story that was politically relevant, and its timing was impeccable. Yeah, that in all its ugliness, in all its shoddiness, the Ugandan reader could excuse all those inconsistencies, and still pick out this fictitious story that almost got the writer killed. I mean, right now he's living in exile, And so, yeah, it's a novel that he wrote in 3 days. Yeah. But if you're to talk to Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, she will tell you that Chintu, her first award-winning novel, took her over 8 years to write. And The First Woman, which is her most recent novel, even took her longer to create, and these are award-winning novels, And so for me, looking at Kakwenza and Nansubuga Makumbi, both writers who have achieved, in my opinion, tremendous success, in their writing career. Sometimes the fact so it is not necessarily about, if it takes me 10 years, I'll write the better story. Believe me, you can still come up with an idea of a novel and you write it in 1 month, and it hits the market and it transforms, our literary traditions. The way I think that Kakwenza's books have really done it. Yeah. So just go with the flow, and trust your own instinct, trust your own instinct. It's very important that you do. Yeah. Then, yes. And then, yes, I think Muwado, Roland has another question. Speaking of language, yes, written and performed in vernacular, is there a marked difference from using English? Definitely. I think language and storytelling are inextricably attached, because when you're telling a story, when you're telling a story in whatever form, you are representing, whether you like it or not, you are representing a culture, you are representing a generation, you are representing how can I call it? A moment of thought and its expressions, whether you like it or not. So in whatever format you choose to tell your story, that will always determine who gets to access your story. Now, as a Ugandan writer, personally, I take the decision that I want my writings to be popular among Ugandans. Now, that is a conscious decision I take. There are some people you'll come across that will tell you, I want to be read in Europe. And they're going to be writing for the European reader. Now, as Kagayi, I do believe it is possible to create a piece of literature that is popular among Ugandans and also popular around the world. And so, as a writer, the first thing you have to, for me, I think the first decision you have to take is, who do you want, who are you writing for? And why are you writing the stories that you're writing? Who do you want, who is your final, when you write a story, who would you want to be your final reader? Because by the time that book gets to that final reader, they must know that this person was writing for me. And I'm sure we all have that particular experience where you read a book and it doesn't matter where it came from. It could have come from South America, from North America, from Australia, but you just feel like this writer was writing for you, because they have that, because as a writer, you know that there is a person out there who wants to listen to your story. Now, we've all read Chinua Achebe. Okay, most of us have read Chinua Achebe. We've read how he writes his stories in pidgin English, and still, when we read them, we still feel like he's representing us. You read Okot Pabitek and his song of Lawino, and his what I call Acholi English, and you still feel you're well represented. So I think the question of language and creativity goes a long way in shaping your identity as a writer. These are personal decisions that you take. I fault nobody for taking whatever decision they do. I have friends who, for them, they decided they'll never write in English because English is not the language that represents them. That's what they feel like. And I have those ones who say, I personally want to write in English because it's my first language anyway. I grew up speaking English, and that is how I feel, my stories will get out there around the world. I want my stories to be accessed throughout the world. And then there are people like me who believe in Youglish. I believe that, English as a language has also evolved and indigenized. Actually, I don't know about what people will say, but I believe English is an African language. I believe English is now a Ugandan language, whether we like it or not. I mean, look at the language we are using to express ourselves. It's the language that we have grown in expressing ourselves. For most children today, it's almost the first language they speak in their homes. It's the language within which our statutes are expressed. It's the language we use to communicate with each other. And this is not to denounce, our indigenous languages, but I feel we have to come to that level where we accept that it's not going anywhere. Now it's part of us. Yes, and then the question, what's the difference between the 3-act structure, the nonlinear narratives, and the fragmented storytelling that works in best different scenarios? The 3-act structure is how can I? The 3-act structure is the format of telling a story where the first part is introducing the characters, introducing the scenes, introducing the plot, and then the second act is now introducing the conflict, and then the third act is conflict resolution. Yeah. And it is a popular way of telling a story. It is I'd say it is a safe way of telling the story. If, say, for example, you read a novel like again, Things Fall Apart, you know, we are introduced to a character called Obi Okonkwo, you know, who was famous in all the nine villages of Umofia, right? And then and we get to know him, we get to know his background, we get to know how he becomes a man, you know. And then in the second part, where, you know, the novel introduces now the foreigners, the colonialists, the missionaries, and how they come, you know, how they come and live into Umofia, and they introduce Christianity and whatnot, you see. And then we see the act of, we see the act of Obi Okonkwo, you know, that gets him now to be excommunicated, which is now in the part 3, you know, where we see now, you know, Mafia has really changed, you know, and then Okonkwo commits another murder where now he gets to hang himself. You see that the three linear structure, the 3-act structure is very prevalent in that particular kind of way, you know, of telling the story. Now, the non-linear narratives, these ones are the ones that really confluence the 3-act structure, you know, where the conflict resolution could be at the end, you know, and then introducing the characters is in the middle, and then the major conflict is actually, you know, at the end. And again, a novel like, say, No Longer at Ease would be, for me, one of the best examples I can think of right now, where, you know, Chinua Achebe, now we start with, again, Okonkwo in court, you know, and the judge is now giving the speech of how he's ashamed and is going to sentence him for the corruption that, you know, and the embezzlement that he was caught committing, you know. And then after that, now the story goes back to, you know, now it takes us to the beginning, you know, where now we see Okonkwo and how he started and how he was, you know, sponsored by the whole village, and then he returns, and then he's marrying and also, and then we see how he grows up in the urban life and how he becomes a public servant, and then how the corruption takes over, you know. And then again, we conclude to the end when he's being arrested. The non-linear. So the story does not really follow it does not follow the chronological order of, you know, one event leading to another. It is fragmented. It could be, like I said, the story begins at the end, and then the beginning is in the 3rd structure. So it also depends on, like, the choices that you take in order to understand how you want to tell your story is really determined by how you want the reader to feel at the end. And then the fragmented storytelling is where how can I best describe this? For me, the fragmented storytelling, I don't know if anyone has read the novel Ghana Must Go Home. It's the best example by Taye Selassie, I think. It's the best novel I can think about that for me uses fragmented storytelling, where, you know, a series of events are described, but they're not following any chronological order, but still it is one story that is being told. Yeah. And you can tell that these stories are leading somewhere. And actually, I think even Chintu by Jennifer Nansovugamakumbi uses the same structure. I think the fragmented storytelling structure works best in novels that you can describe as epic novels. Yeah. So in Chintu, we see the story following so many characters, so many characters who were cast as a result of an act that was done by their great grandfather, you know. And then he was cast by this man that, you know, I think he committed a murder of a son who was supposed to take care of, and the father of that son cast Chintu. And so the novel chronicles how the curse follows the subsequent generations, but it ends up in this one, and in the last chapter, in this one scene where all these characters are now coming together to participate in a family ritual that is going to absorb them of this, of this curse. And that is the best way I can define it. So the fragmented storytelling is just it's a series of many different stories, but with one link, with one linkage that seeks to also have one resolution at the end. Yes, thank you, Jerome. Thank you so much. I think especially your comment on finding yourself also ties into the question that Trinity is asking in the chat of there are three questions in one, but how she's asking how my journey on storytelling is going so far, and have I found and figured out my audience by now, or am I still learning as I go along? Now, like Jerome was saying, before you get to discover before you get to think that you know yourself, it's important that you expose yourself to a lot of literary experiences. Do not limit yourself because maybe you're writing this particular genre. Allow your soul, allow your spirit to absorb as much as it can take in. But for me, the thing about expressing myself, the long story short is that the most important audience you have is your own, is yourself. Like for me, I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, why do I write? Why is writing important to me? I don't think you'll ever get to know your audience per se, because people change. You also change as an individual, but I think what happens is people are drawn. What draws an audience or a readership to a reader is they connect. It's empathy. I think there is audience empathy and the reader's empathy. The writer, the audience and the readers will connect with your honesty. They will connect with your vulnerability. They will connect with your purpose as a writer. I think it's dangerous for you to think I am writing. I think for me it would be a dangerous mindset to say I am now writing for this particular kind of audience. But that is my opinion. I know there are writers who have made a lot of money and have gone to so many places by being strategic enough to know, now I'm going to write a story for this particular audience. They express themselves this way. They study the audience and they create material that fits them. And I think some of the most successful, even people who normally win awards for short stories or for novels, have that kind of mindset in most cases, to say, so there's this particular story competition. This is the history of their narrative. These are the themes they're interested in, and I'm going to write something like that, and I'm going to put myself out there. I have no beef with that. I mean, each writer to each their own. I personally think, for me, writing is therapy. That's how I came to creative writing. It was a space where I went to feel whole, to feel complete, to deal with my internal crises, to answer questions that were lingering in my mind, to express my anger, to express my feelings that I was feeling within me that I could not, shout at a person or, I don't know, punch someone. I just went to that page and I started writing. And I remember, for me, my breakthrough was in 2012 when Uganda was celebrating 50 years of independence, and I was part of a group called the Lantern Meet of Poets. And so we asked ourselves the question, but what is our responsibility as writers? What is our role in defining the identity of our nations? And I remember before that, I used to write like Shakespeare. I used to write like like the British American and the South American writers that I used to look up to. And I used to feel good. But in that moment, I sort of broke out of that particular shell, and I started writing the way I felt. Like I started writing in a way that I would feel I am reconciling with my inner self. Yeah. And then I started putting the work out there. And then a lot of readers and many of the audiences, that some of the people that still read my work up to today and still, turn up for my shows that I stage, the connection that we started having started then, and I started getting a lot of feedback, that was saying, this guy is expressing how I also feel about what is going on. And for what I can't say that I started out by saying I know my particular audience, or I even know how my audience looks like, or I know who I'm writing to. But what I can assure you is that I knew whatever I was writing, it was making me feel whole. I was putting my vulnerabilities on the page for my mental health, basic. And it didn't matter whether I was writing politics or culture or love, everything. So I felt like when I was putting myself on paper, I was leaving a certain part of me there. And whoever would come across my work would know I'm picking up a piece of this guy, And then people started resonating with that. I remember when I was going to do my first show at the Kampala International Theatre Festival, which eventually became my first tour, my first play. It was called The Audience Must Say Amen. I was a bit skeptical about my own works, and I didn't even know why I had been selected to be the opening act of that festival. And so I asked my director, she's called Angela Emuwun, who is an award-winning playwright. And I asked her, Angie, I really don't understand why they chose me, because some of the poems that I was performing were even poems in Lusoga, which is my indigenous language. And there was Luganda, and there were all these specific stories about Uganda. And for some reason, I was going to perform at an international platform. And then she tells me something. She says, Kagayi, the more specific you are, the better. Because if you're going to go on an international stage, if you try to be international, then you look like no one. But if you remain yourself, if you remain true to who you are and how you express yourself and how you view the world, now that is what becomes international. Because the international sees itself in who you are. See? And I went with the flow, and before we knew it, that was the first play that toured Europe. And we also don't know why they liked it, but for some reason, people seem to like it. Yeah. So what I have realized as I go along the journey of storytelling and story writing is people will connect with your true self. And it doesn't matter whether you're from Chile, or you're from Bolivia, or you're from Australia, or you're from Canada, or you're from Norway, wherever you are. What connects people to the story that you're telling is how true you reveal yourself in that particular story you're telling. And that is what, and I guess the essence, that's what makes us human. Because we are all human wherever we go. So you tell your humanity, and your audience will come to you. You won't even have to run after it. Yeah. That's what I can say about it. And then the question, are these rules different when storytelling digitally? No, they are the same, because the consumers are the same. Now, the medium could be different, and the mediums will always change, Like if you look at the writers in the 70s and 80s and the writers of today, we have so many advantages, technological advantages over those many writers, But still, for me, the ethos is the same, because the people that are going to consume these works, okay, they are still people who are going to consume these works, And so thinking of thinking of the characters that, like, if you look at some of the people that have gone viral, in their storytelling, in their storytelling methods on digital. Look at a guy like Kabilen, who was in France, who was making nonverbal communications. You look at the comedians in Kenya, the people in Uganda, etc. People like Uncle Mo, whoever cuts across that divide and becomes a trend, and not just a one-off, but a repetitive trend. Yeah, they're still staying true to who they are. They're still staying true to the essence of telling a story that teaches the world about themselves and their environment. And I think that it's very crucial that even when the modes of storytelling change, the ethos of storytelling remains the same. How is okay? Then there's another question in the group. How is it been making a living from storytelling? What are the opportunities in digital storytelling versus offline storytelling? Now, the first question: how has that been living? How has it been making a living of storytelling? It's been amazing. It's been awesome, and I can only thank God that I've been able to, to live the life that I chose to live as a storyteller. Who makes a living of storytelling, majorly, 100%, nothing else. I'm grateful for the opportunities that have come through for me. Now, the kind of storytelling that I do for me is more offline, and because I write for theater, I write plays, but that does not mean that there are no opportunities. That doesn't mean that there are no opportunities for me to also make a living off digital storytelling, because whether we like it or not, the number of people who consume content digitally are quite high, right? And also, in a way, digital storytelling actually supports your offline storytelling way more, perhaps even way better than digital storytelling. Yeah. So what I would suggest, what I recommend to writers today is to be able to take to take advantage of, to make the best of both worlds, yeah, of digital storytelling and offline storytelling. Digital storytelling is important because it will build for you an audience. It's perhaps the best marketing strategy you can have to put your work out there. Yeah, and now the platforms are quite a number as well for you to be able to know, the various ways that you can make your works popular. There are quite a number. I think one of my favorite poets who's made a living off digital and offline storytelling is Rupi Kaur. Rupi Kaur started off as an Instagram poet, and then now she sells out theaters around the world. There are poets like, say, Wasan Shire, whose works became popular to all of us through YouTube. By the time they were dropping books, by the time they were doing their offline storytelling, the digital space had already made them popular. There are writers like Biko Zulu from Nairobi, who most of us did first met through his blogs, through his digital storytelling. And it's the same thing that I believe Muwado is doing. There are so many writers that Muwado has been able to bring forward to us, as digital storytelling consumers, that we might not even have had an opportunity to access offline. And then the other thing about digital storytelling is archiving, because in offline, the digital space offers so many advantages to a creative, to a storyteller. Your works are protected ad infinitum. And I don't know until I don't know, something happens and maybe Facebook or X, somebody hacks their servers and destroys all their data. But the fact that that work is part of that cloud, is a form of protecting your work, you know. And there's a lot of offline content that we lose that we do not know about because it happens in that spark of a moment and it's gone. Or it's a book that is published and it's not uploaded digitally. And for some reason, books in Uganda, the gestation period of a book is 3 years. After 3 years, it is dead. You'll never see it. You'll never see it again. So I believe that there are opportunities that storytellers can tap into and should tap into, both digitally and offline. Moses Sergo is asking the spellings of the names of the digital storytellers that I just mentioned. Biko Zulu, Bikozulu, popular blogger from Kenya, and now I think is globally known. Of course, Kabilane, Kabyline, from France, who started off by creating content without saying anything, and for some reason he's made billions of money out of it. Now he's featured at global events around the world. Stage versus written. How does the structure, plot, and change in these particular mediums? Yeah. Honestly speaking, for me, they are the same. They are the same, and I can say this because when I was starting out as a writer, I was lucky enough that I joined a team of poets that was called the Lantern Meet of Poets, who were both writers and performers. And so we always tasked ourselves to create content that is palatable, both, you see. So if you are going to, say, for example, write a humorous poem, that poem had to be humorous in its written form and also in its performance form. So for me, I do not see any difference between how you write for the stage and how you write for the page. The whatever you're going to create has to be equally nourishing to the sensibilities of whoever is going to receive it. And I know this because as a performer, I know I can manipulate any piece and give the listener an impression that it sounds a certain way. But upon reading it, they realize that it reads different. So I am acutely aware of that. But what I believe in, for me, is the structure, the plot, and the change should not even change when you're changing mediums. It is that simple. Now, let me explain it this way. Now, of course, in the performance module, in the oral performance module, I may have more utilities at my disposal to create a certain effect. So, for example, I could have music instruments, I could have a sound score, and I am going to, I'm going to create, and we are going to create this particular melody that is going to enrich the listener or the viewer's experience of this particular piece of literature that we have created. Yeah, I do appreciate that. But be that as it may, I also believe that the piece of writing that has been created must have the ability to stand on its own merits as a written piece of literature. The same way, say, for example, you can read a novel like, say, Half of the Yellow Sun by Chimamanda, and then a few years later, you go to the cinema to watch the movie, and you can appreciate that the adaptation of that movie is a different experience of the text, But that does not take away the fact that the novel is a literary masterpiece of its own, and that the movie, is also a screen masterpiece of its own. I think it's really, really possible, to create pieces that, whether they're going to be for spoken or written, they still are good. Yeah.
Kagayi,
Yes.
the people, it would seem, are satisfied. I don't know if this is a sign that they're satisfied. There's some compliments. I think you can take those ones. I think what I would, maybe the final question, and unless others come up, is with the way things are going, with the way storytelling is going, as someone who has been navigating this space for some time now, what opportunities do you see for African storytellers? What can they take advantage of? You've been around, you've experimented in different forms. Yeah, for the people who are just starting out on this journey. But what do you see? What does the future look like for you, for the African storyteller? Where are the opportunities?
Okay. Thank you, Roland, and thank you, Unity, for your compliments. Now, first and foremost, I think there is a global hunger for African literature. For African literature from Africa, if I'm to put it clearly, where I think there is now a heightened increase in interest of Africa speaking for itself. Yeah, I think we've had so many African writers who have gone to live in the diaspora, who have also been writing about the diaspora experience. Even African writers write about the African experience. Say like the Ngugi wa Thiongos did it, the Chinua Achebes did it. But now beyond colonization, beyond writing stories about colonialism, beyond writing about the wars and the poverties that have been taking place in Africa all these years, I believe there is a hunger for Africa telling its story the African way, and I believe for the writers who are getting out there, I think it's very important that you invest a lot of energy in telling the stories of your communities and highlighting the uniqueness of these stories and how these people live and how people are grappling with all these changes in our societies. I believe that Africa is also going a seismic shift in for example, how the world has always viewed Africa, as the third world country, and now there is a hunger for an Africa that is different, for an Africa, that is, that celebrates itself, the Africa that, that centers itself as the crowd of civilization, to tell those particular stories that, like what sort of, say what Hollywood did with Wakanda, So people are asking, I think a lot of people in the globe are asking, do we have to wait for America to tell that story, the vibranium story? How about Africa tells its own story? And there is hunger for that. I believe there is a lot of room for positive stories out of Africa. But even that being said, even the narrative of colonialism has now changed, and I think there are quite a number of questions that are being, say, for example, positioned around the question of reparations. Like how now the story is moving away from we were colonized. Now the story is we want to be compensated. And how does Africa view itself in this particular story, for example? Just a few weeks ago, I think there was a court case in Uganda where the High Court ruled that, all the roads in Uganda that are named after colonial officials should be dealt away with, you know? And it's a story from Uganda that has made its rounds in Europe. So now, we are storytellers. We have to be positioning ourselves to understand that, you know, the moods are changing. The moods around how we define ourselves and our identity is changing. So how are we tapping into that? How are we creating the new African character? You know, the new African setting. So what I would advise really the writers who are getting out there is to keep your ear on the ground, observe your environment, observe its changes, know what is going on around the people, around yourself, and those are the stories that people are hungering for. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we have to first understand that Nigeria, South Africa, let me just say West Africa, Southern Africa, and Northern Africa. They have a history of institutional structures that feed the Western market with literature. Yeah. But despite that, even those institutions that are feeding this literature also had their challenges. Now, the flip of now wanting more African writers to be telling stories of Africa from Africa is now prevalent. But these countries, all these regions, are still dominating those spaces because of a hegemony that they have that has been there over a period of time. Yeah. It is true that we do not have enough global outreach as it is there, but it is not as strong as it should be. I think people like Goretti Chomuhendo have positioned themselves with African Writers Trust to be doing exactly that in East Africa. Yeah. The only challenge that and it's still a challenge that they cannot fight on their own. This is where we need the collective efforts as creative artists in creative storytellers in East Africa. Is that so even African Writers Trust becomes a gateway for us to access more Western African literature, rather than us selling our African literature to West Africa or to Southern Africa. So the moment you create a portal in East Africa and you define it as African literature, it is going to be flooded by the literatures from these already popular regions. Yeah. Of course, we also need help in the form of government policy that comes up to see that, for example, there are reductions on taxes of books, or there are incentives that for, especially now that we have been talking about the East African market and the East African community, there should be incentives that are put there for storytellers, in order to be able to create their own stories. Yeah. I think there should also be more networking. We need more networking spaces between Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, DRC, and Uganda. That it is. I think if you remember a few years ago when we were having an event like Writivism, for example, you'll be surprised at how many, say, writers from West Africa would also be featuring in such. Not that it's a bad thing. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking of African literature, that is what we have to contend with. We also have to contend with the popularity of literature from West Africa, Southern Africa, from North Africa. Yeah. But what we need, and encouraging the East African creative storyteller, to focus on their stories. We had Kwani, which, for example, gave us amazing writers like Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and Writivism, and Babishai Niwe. All these were good platforms that were that became, stepping stones for a lot of writers to access the global market. Unfortunately, they all suffered the problems that most grant-funded organizations do when they run out of money or when they run out of ideas to sell to their funders. Yeah. So we also, and in West Africa, we've seen, and Southern Africa, we've seen the corporate community also take interest in promoting literature. So I think ours should be, because what we are going to be fighting is a privileged status that West Africa, Southern Africa, and North Africa have been enjoying for quite a while, And in East Africa, we need some form of affirmative action. We need some form of affirmative action to not just to expose, but also raise the self-esteem of the East African writer, and give them more opportunities to create, give them more opportunities to travel. The Baganda here have a saying that okutambula kulaba okudda kunyumya. We have more writers traveling outside there so that they can also know how stories, so that they can learn and come back and share, how stories are told. Yes, but it is true for me to agree with Moses. We need more initiatives. We need more local and more regional initiatives that highlight the creative works of the storytellers in East Africa. Thank you.
Kagayi, where can people find your work online? For those who are...
I have some books on Amazon. There are some videos of mine on YouTube where I'm doing my theater poetry. I have a YouTube channel, Kagayi Ngobi. There are some works there.
All right, guys. I think that's it. I'm going to release Kagayi. Please find him online. You've just had a small section of the extensive knowledge he has about storytelling. So please find him online. I've shared in the group a podcast we recorded, I think maybe like 3 years ago, where he gives more details about the journey and the intricate difficulties he had to overcome to get where he is now. So please check it out and join me with your reactions, and let's give this man some hand claps before he goes, so that he knows we appreciate him. Thank you, Kagayi.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Thank you, Muwado, for the opportunity to share.